I'm Leo Walder for Kit Guru. Phanteks Eclipse P500A is a variant of the Phanteks Eclipse P600S that I reviewed last year and liked a great deal. We saw the P500A at the Phanteks suite at CES 2020, so 6 months ago, and at that time I said, and finally we have the Eclipse P500A. This is the chassis that's really caught my eye. And I stand by those words. This case looks like it has a decent amount of potential. Let me start by peeling off this film. So satisfying. So P500A is based on the P600. There are two versions. This is the more expensive RGB version, which refers to lighting in this panel here, and also in these three RGB fans at the front of the case. Like so. The three RGB fans are visible through the front panel, and there's also RGB at the top of the panel, so you get quite a light show. You can connect the RGB lighting to your motherboard, or you can control it through these front panel buttons here. In addition to those, we have USB Type-C, a pair of USB 3.0s, headset jack, and there's your power button. So the RGB version of the P500A has RGB as the name suggests and is slightly cheaper than the P600S. You can buy the P600S right now for about £128 in the UK. This is a penny under 120, 119.99. The reason it's cheaper is you miss out on a couple of accessories. I'll come to those in a bit, and the front and top panels are quite a bit different to the P600S, which you could use in either airflow or quiet mode. So the top and front panels on the 600S were quite complicated. You had noise deadening material and you had lift out sections that would open up the airflow. You don't get any of that here. On the top, magnetic exterior dust filter, metal panel fixed in place. It's actually screwed at the rear, so I'm sure you can remove it, but you're not intended to particularly. At the front we have the panel that we saw at CES. All these perforations are 1mm holes. This mesh is part of the panel, it's not added on. Simply pops off. So this is the filter. There is no extra filter. And behind you have the core chassis. The construction of P500A compared to P600S is much more simple. However, Phanteks tells us this new front panel is actually quite expensive. Despite being simple, it's sophisticated. If the P500A had stuck with the fabric filters found in the P600S rather than this new metal mesh, it is obvious you would not get this light show at the front of the case. If instead of spending £120 on this RGB version of P500A, if instead you go for the £95 version without the RGB, to my mind what you've got is something that's more akin to an update of the Pro M. Having said that, I like the Pro M a lot. That wouldn't be bad at all. But this is the RGB version, so we've got these fans to consider, we've got the brand new front panel to look at, and we've got the features around the back of the case. To remove the panel, two thumb screws which are captive. Away it comes. No noise deadening material, it's just steel. And this looks pretty much exactly like the P600S. Power supply, obviously, a load of open space here for storage, and three 2.5-inch caddies go there. Bring in the accessory pack, two caddies that can take either 3.5-inch drive or a 2.5-inch. And these can snap together, so you can put them in as a tower of two or individually. They snap into these locations here, exactly like the P600S. Put them at the front, you've got loads of space for your power supply. If you want to put them there, it's a bit tight for space. If you want more storage, you can buy extra caddies. The P600S came with 4 of these caddies, the 500 only has 2. You can also install drive caddies in these locations here, once you've removed these blanking plates. That's interesting. That cover's actually blocked by a couple of cables incorrectly routed. Anyway, to illustrate the point, we take two caddies that are stacked, offer them up, et voila. And if you want, you can put 2, 4, 6, 8 caddies in a stack. You can put up to 4 in the basement, and you've got 3 SSD sleds. That's a lot of storage. How do you prevent your horizontal graphics card from sagging? Phanteks GPU anti-sag bracket must surely cost pennies to make. It sits there, right out of sight, and you lock it in place with a couple of thumb screws there. The idea is your graphics card is obviously the other side of the panel, and it engages like so, and then by pulling down you can just tug up that corner there. That's the one that will sag, and as a result you don't need any nasty hardware here. It's all done in that far corner. Brilliant. If you like the idea of a vertical graphics card, you've got 3 slots. This liquid cooled card could go here or here. An air cooled card, clearly want to back it away from the glass to avoid choking it. The snag is that your graphics card is unsupported at this end. Phanteks includes this black plastic accessory in the pack, which can either go there or there. However, there's quite a lot of space between the bracket and your graphics card because it requires a PCI Express riser. That is not included. If you happen to have a cable like this fractal, which can be installed like so, you're probably in business. Otherwise, you're going to have to give Phanteks some money. Regardless of whether you go for a horizontal graphics card installation or vertical, you might be glad of this hole here so you can feed your power cables up and through. If you want, you could remove the cover altogether. If you're not using it, it looks neat and tidy. Another area where Phanteks has cut back, there is no fan hub. So your 3 fans have 3-pin connectors, not PWM, and you have to plug them into your motherboard or buy a hub. You can buy the Phanteks hub as an accessory. The final accessory we'll mention for the time being is the dual system installation kit, which essentially is a motherboard tray for a mini ITX motherboard. You see, ready for an I/O shield. With the correct kit, which installs in the roof of the case, you have dual system support. You will, however, require a power supply that can supply 2 systems, and that's a Phanteks Revolt X. They sell a lot of accessories to Phanteks. I've built my test PC into the P500A. I'll go through the components in just a moment, but first, fans. When I was going through the storage options in this case earlier, I mentioned that one of those sliding covers seemed to be sticking slightly, and when I investigated I found it was indeed chafing against one of the fan cables, and the cable is in fact slightly damaged. Not pleasing. Happily, Phanteks had sent me a triple pack of the same fans, RGB 140mm 1500 RPM, but PWM. So I've swapped out the stock fans, including that one that's slightly damaged, for 3 of the same. I could have kept that to myself, but let's face it, you would have spotted the PWM splitter at the top of the case and you'd have thought, that's funny, those fans have gained an extra pin. In addition to the triple pack, Phanteks sent me this single 140mm PWM fan, so I'm going to put that in the rear of the case at some point, which will give me 4 140mm fans, but for now it's 3 PWMs of the same spec, except I have more control over the fans. Anyway, enough about that. The test PC does not, as you can see yet, have a CPU cooler, just so you can get a good look at what's going on. The motherboard is an MSI B450 Gaming Plus Max processor, Ryzen 9 3900X. We've got some Corsair Vengeance LPX 3200 DDR4 memory. SSD is a Samsung 970 EVO M.2. Graphics card is a Gigabyte RTX 2080 Super. Power supply is a Phanteks Revolt X. At the moment, I've got loads of options for where I put my cooling. Part of the reason I've got loads of options is because I haven't gone for a dual system installation. If I had a mini ITX here, quite clearly that takes up a bunch of space. So at the moment, I've got the option of having a 360 or 420 rad in the front, 360 or 280 in the roof. If I went dual system, clearly that all changes. If I take this EK360 rad, you can see it easily slips in the roof or in the front, and I could in fact put 2 360 rads in the system as it stands at the moment, because of course I've got loads of space to work with. I've got the bare bones of an installation. If I was to choose to put, for example, this EK Quantum Kinetic pump res, it's a D5 pump res, say there, that would of course impact my options for storage here. The thing is, the P500A in terms of fan and radiator options, it's pretty much identical to the P600S. And I'm familiar with that case. What I'm really interested with P500A is looking at how that mesh front panel works. To cool the CPU, I've gone from a trusty Fractal Celsius S36, so there's a 360ml liquid cooler in the roof of the case. That's significant because if I refer to, for example, the 3 stock 140 fans in the front, it's 3 plus 320s in the roof. I started by testing with the 3 Phanteks fans in the front, no fan in the rear, the 3 Fractal fans set to 1000 RPM. My starting point with the Phanteks fans was 1500 RPM because those non-PWM fans will run at 1500 RPM, and it was bloomin' rackety. Then I slowed them down to 1200 RPM, and I slowed them again to 1000 RPM, which is what they're running at the moment. At 1000 RPM, the case is a bit noisy, but it's not terrible. After I tested with 3 fans at the front at those different speeds, I then settled for 1000 RPM, added an extra fan at the rear, disconnected the bottom fan at the front, so I had 2 plus 1, tested with that, and then reconnected this bottom fan to give the configuration I have at the moment. So that's 4 Phanteks 140s, 3 Fractal 120s, all running at 1000 RPM. You won't be surprised to learn the cooling's quite good. Pretty much the only test that actually showed a difference depending on the cooling configuration was a TimeSpy stress test, and that's the CPU part of that test. The GPU, it just sat there working away rock solid. The Gigabyte cooler on that RTX 2080 Super works well, and the CPU and GPU in Ada 64, it didn't really make much difference which fan configuration I used. My priority of the configuration was to run fan speeds that were reasonably quiet rather than crazy noisy, and frankly, the aesthetics. The P500A boils down to that front panel. It's metal mesh, it doesn't have an extra filter. Clearly at the moment I haven't got a clue how well it filters or otherwise. It's brand new, it's completely clean. If that mesh front panel filters correctly, then it means we don't actually need in future to see any case with a glass front panel that doesn't flow air by definition. If instead we can have metal mesh that does flow air, and we can still see the bling behind it, well, hurrah, what's not to like? To wrap this up, the P500A brings almost nothing new to the Phanteks party. It's all about that front panel. This case is, depending on your point of view, either a slightly raised up Pro M or it's a cut down P600S, which in turn is a much cut down Evolve X. As cases go, it's perfectly decent. I don't personally see the need for the dual system configuration option. I think the idea you can add in a dozen hard drives and SSDs is little short of crazy. I feel no need to do that whatsoever. If I did happen to want to build a PC that was storage centered, for example, and was going to have a load of drives in it, would I want to have glass and RGB and so on? I mean, maybe, but I can't imagine that situation. Similarly, the idea you can have a vertical graphics card, but they don't give you the hardware to do it, therefore you have to buy an accessory. That's slightly tedious, but I can see people going for that. The thing is, a PCI Express riser cable is expensive. Depending on the brand you go for, 20, 30, 40 quid, that's a significant chunk of change on a case that's costing around £115. Get the budget version that's, you know, under £100, and that riser cable is a massive percentage. So I don't hold it against Phanteks. They don't include that accessory that after all many people won't use. The idea they have a triple slot vertical mount, that's clever. If you do want to go vertical GPU, you want to make sure it flows air. So that triple slot feature, very clever. And yet simple and cheap. That's the good thing about it. It's clever design. One thing I do resent, and I've touched on this, is that the fans that are supplied with this case are a special cheaper version for the P500A. They are called case spec fans, and they are 3-pin, i.e. non-PWM. I've come across this with a number of different case manufacturers. Quite clearly, if they can cut costs, they will, and they do. However, generally speaking, they get around this by including a fan hub, which essentially gives you the best of both worlds. In this instance, they've taken out the fan hub. You get the P600S. Yes, you can buy it as an accessory or from a number of other manufacturers, but the fact that Phanteks doesn't include a fan hub, but they go for the cheaper 3-pin fans, I don't like that one little bit. The RGB, on the other hand, I love a great deal. The built-in functions in the case are very good, or you can plug the digital RGB header to your motherboard and control it through your motherboard software. Quite honestly, the case function controls are as good as most software, and you might just sort of stick with those. I think it looks absolutely excellent. If those fans, as well as RGB, were PWM, I'd be fairly happy. So to boil it down, P600S, like it. It's a good case. It does a great many things, but it's got a kind of a serious inclination to it. This, with the RGB, the glass, the perforated front panel, seems a bit frivolous. Therefore, all the extra things it can do, the dual system, the multiple storage options and so on, I just don't think they're necessary. What we have here is a cheery RGB case from Phanteks that might, if you put it to work, be serious. But it's quite expensive. However, the single biggest problem with it is if you ramp up the fan speeds, it's noisy. It flows air well, but it's noisy. There's not a scrap of noise deadening about it. If you're more interested in RGB than quiet, it could well be one for you. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell button, subscribe, head over to kitguru.net to read our news and reviews. I'm Leo Woodard for Kit Guru. This is the Phanteks Eclipse P500A.